it's our community, and how nice it is that you've come back. We have a guest today, and he too is our neighbor, and his name is Joe Tomelleri. And Joe is a scientific illustrator, not bodies, but fish. And we're going to see how he got there, what he does, and it's really most interesting. And I know you graduated from Fort Hays in botany.
Yeah, I had a degree in botany and with an emphasis in range management, and that was.
So you're going to be a park ranger?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to do. I worked a little bit for the Nature Conservancy in the early 1980s. And
as a botanist?
Right, yes.
Well, and then in '86 you started being an illustrator. How did you get from botany to fish?
Well, at Hayes there were a group of graduate students, 6 or 7 of us, that had an interest in sort of all biology. And we did a little book for the university on the fishes in the stream. It was called Big Creek, that went through campus. And we studied it for about 2 years and collected all the fish and came up with about 30 species. And a friend of mine was going to photograph them. He was a pretty good photographer. Of course, we're talking in about 1980 now. But he came to me one day.
When we were both younger.
Yeah, a little bit. Yes. He came to me one day and he said, you know, these fish are really hard to photograph. I'm having a terrible time with them. And I said, well, I can just draw them. I know a little bit about art. And that was how I got started.
So you could draw, but you hadn't done much of it?
No, I did a little bit when I was a kid, and I was encouraged by my aunt, who's a well-known artist. And on into high school, I didn't really do illustration or painting, at least not much.
So you were kind of an arty artist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So these were the first ones I did, and of course, if I go back and look at those pictures now, I don't like them very well. But
you say, who did that?
Yeah, there's no shame in getting better, I guess.
Exactly. But I know that besides being an artist of fish, you are a fisherman.
Yeah.
Carp, it is it not?
I do a lot of fly fishing for carp, and I used to do more. In fact, right down on Indian Creek is a pretty good place to go. And
you know, carp are fighters. Is that why you like them?
Yeah, you can stalk them, and you see them in the shallow water and cast to them, and they're easily spooked. So it's really quite a challenge, and they're called by some people freshwater bonefish, and bonefish is a famous saltwater fish that fly fishermen seek.
Do you eat them, or just put them back?
No, I throw them back.
Well, they're not really very big, are they, around here?
They'll get pretty big. You'll see 10, 15 pounders pretty often.
Around here?
Mm-hmm.
I'll be darned. Huh.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't really realize that. I would think I always thought, well, you have to, because you know the fish that you catch out of the river, they're not very good shape to eat.
No, I've eaten carp, but I don't like them.
Don't like them?
So, no, but it's just
makes you feel bad.
It's the thrill of the chase.
That's right. When you first started to draw fish, how long did it take you to get good at it?
I would say probably took about 100 illustrations to get where I was really comfortable and seemed to know what I was doing. And I realized pretty early on, just from doing a few pictures, that I needed the real fish to draw from, and I needed to see the fish alive and photograph it for color. And that experience is what gives me confidence anyway to do the illustration and to say that this particular fish, say it might be a male and it looked like this and had this color on this certain day. Because the fish, once they're caught, they're preserved. I'll preserve them in formalin, and after I photograph them, of course. And then they can be washed in water after a few days and then kept indefinitely in ethanol. And then so I'll actually draw the fish from the preserved specimen. So there won't be
the color holds?
No, the colors will disappear once they're preserved.
So that's why you have to photograph them.
Yeah, in fact, quite often once they're caught, if the fish is kept in any kind of light bucket or something, they'll wash out and the color will change. So they need to be photographed immediately.
Quickly. Well, I know that you draw with, what are barrel pencils?
It's a
Prismacolor pencils.
It's a color pencil, yeah.
And so you don't paint, you use those colored pencils.
Right.
Because they have a finer point, you can be more accurate?
Well, when I started, I asked a fella at the art store what he thought I might use, and he suggested, he said, try pencil. It's a slow medium, but they're easy to blend. The pencil's different from, say, paint, because with paint you mix it on the palette and apply it. With colored pencil you do all your mixing right on the illustration.
Who was that guy we just looked at, that fish? Who was
Oh,
that?
that's a red-banded rockfish. That's from Puget Sound.
Puget Sound? He's awfully pretty.
That's a project. I'm working on the fishes of Puget Sound right now.
Is he that bright?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Really?
There are about 50 species of rockfishes, and they're absolutely beautiful.
You have become a regular ichthyologist.
Yeah, I guess somewhat, just by chance, just from picking up information. I get a lot of ichthyologists that help me, and I work for ichthyologists. So the background in biology is a huge help.
Well, precision, you are a scientific illustrator and not an arty artist. So precision and accuracy are really, really important.
Yeah, because fish are, a lot of the identification, especially of minnows and such, they'll use how many scales, rows they have, or how many fin rays in some of the fins. So all those things are important that they be exact.
Well, and here's a little guy that is kind of small.
Yeah, that's a Missouri saddle darter, and they're found in Missouri, and they're about 2.5 to 3 inches long. There's about 100 species of darters.
So when you get a hold of, now did you get him dead or alive?
I got him dead from a professor at the University of St. Louis, because I'm doing a darter project for him.
Lots of darters are out there,
Yeah,
huh?
yeah.
Well, and so do you count the scales and you count the...
Yeah, what I do is count the scale rows. Most often the scales are in regular rows, and then sometimes there'll be an injury on the fish, so there'll be some abnormality to the rows, and I don't typically put the abnormalities in. I'll draw it like that injury didn't happen.
You just kind of ignore the fact.
Yeah.
Well, when you first started, did you ever leave anything out that was really important? I mean, when you start, you've learned a lot in these, you've been doing this, 20-some years?
Yeah, about 25.
Well,
I would say that originally, when I started, I was already, I guess, had a bachelor's degree in biology and was working on a master's degree, so I understood at least what science was and what scientific illustration was, but I wasn't very well versed in fish, so I had to learn that there's certain scale counts on the fish that needed to be exactly what they were on the specimen. Or, for instance, a largemouth bass and a spotted bass might look fairly similar, but a spotted bass might have 68 rows of scales and a largemouth bass might have, for instance, 60.
and it makes a difference.
Oh yeah, yeah. Because if you draw a largemouth bass with with more scales, then technically it becomes a different species.
And you have made a mistake.
Yeah. Well, I've made my share of mistakes.
Do you get called on it?
Oh yeah, all the time.
Do you?
I do. Yeah, especially if I'm doing fish that I haven't seen alive, but that I'm working from a specimen. And that's a little more difficult because I haven't had the fish in my hand. But most of the ones I've done, I've caught myself. But for instance, most of the Puget Sound fishes, they're sending to me because there's so few of them anymore in Puget Sound that they have to collect the fresh specimens on a trawl between Washington and Alaska that spends a summer going back and forth.
How do they keep the color vibrant?
They have, that's another problem with the stuff in a trawl that you're bringing up from the deep ocean, because sometimes a trawl will be out for an hour, and by the time you get the specimens up, they're dead.
they've had it by that
Yeah,
time.
and the color will start to fade. So it's a give and take. Sometimes the specimens will have beautiful color, sometimes they won't, and we have to search for something else that shows me what was that color when that fish was alive.
Are the specimens in Puget Sound so scarce because of the pollution in the water, because of overfishing? What?
I think it's mostly overfishing.
Overfishing. Well, I know that you are recognized by many as the finest scientific illustrator of fish, not only here, but in the world, Joe.
Well, there's a few people that do. There are probably just not very many people that do fish then. There are a lot of wonderful wildlife artists and people that are better than I am at making compositions and doing things.
Well, but you basically don't do compositions. You just,
not much.
as a scientific illustrator, you do fish.
Right. And basically my job is to take the fish and make it look better than a photograph. Make it so that you can count the scales on the drawing, that the color's not obstructed by reflections of the sun and so forth.
Who's this guy?
This is a Rio Mayo trout.
But it is a trout.
Yeah, and it's from Mexico.
And what is the basic difference in this trout? If somebody smarter than I looked at this, they should be able to tell you exactly what kind of trout this is.
They might call it a rainbow trout because they're somewhat related to rainbows. The closest relative of this trout would be the Mexican golden, at least of the name trout. But we have a group called Truchus mexicanus that travels to Mexico. Well, we used to go every year until the last few years and all the trouble down there. But we've been going down for 15 years and studying the native trout in the mountains, and have found quite a few new species.
I know you have. Talk about some of the new species you found.
We still even find a few in the U.S. now and then, and it's not always that they haven't been known to science, but it's that somebody didn't recognize that particular fish was a different species. Now in Mexico, we've found 2 species of trout on the Atlantic side of the mountains, from which previously there were none known. But we had some information from some very old publications and some old, from back in the 1800s, some information that suggested at least that there might be trout over there.
So you have to do a little research before you start out on one of these junkets.
Yeah, especially in Mexico, we have to do a lot of research. And then even in the U.S., to know where to catch a fish, a particular kind, you have to know where to go. And
Would you use guides?
Oh, in Mexico we use guides, native folks for guides, but in the U.S. I'll generally go with fish and game folks or professors from the university, and quite often we'll collect by electroshocking, which is the most efficient way to get smaller fish.
But illegal unless you have a permit, is it?
Yes, it is.
So we don't want anybody to get the idea that they can go out and shock the fish.
Except in Mexico, it's not really, not much is illegal, and you don't have to have a fishing license either down there.
When you fish, are you particular about your reels and your rods and your lures and your flies and all that kind of thing?
Well, not so much. Not when I go out just for fun, and it's too much work to me to be too particular about it. So I could probably catch more fish if I was, but.
Yeah. What kind of a camera do you use to? Because these people are listening and they want to know, what kind of a camera do you use to photograph your fish?
Oh, anymore, I just use a small, compact digital camera because it's with a macro lens for the close-up, because it's indispensable now compared to when I started and they had to use 35 millimeter, and it's so much easier now.
Well, if they send you, sometimes they'll send you a frozen specimen. Does that deteriorate just like it does if they put it in formaldehyde or formalin or something like that?
A frozen specimen is easier to work from in that the fins are very flexible, and it's easier to see the natural shape. So sometimes when I collect fish, if it's a really large fish like salmon I'll freeze those and ship them back home.
In dry ice or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then keep them in my freezer. And my wife won't let me keep them in the upstairs freezer, so I had to get my own.
That's right. You said, if you won't let me, I'll just get my own.
But
I think
those,
that's funny.
Those fish are easier to draw to get the natural shape, but they get pretty slimy once they thaw out.
Well, I know that you accumulate, because you've done maybe 1,000, at least 1,000 fish.
Right.
So you accumulate a lot of specimens. What do you do with? I mean, you could have specimens up to your eyeballs. What do you do with them?
Yeah, whatever fish I draw from, it comes. The fish has been in or is going to be deposited in a museum. For instance, the University of Kansas has a large fish collection, and Fort Hays, where I went to school, has a pretty good fish collection. So I've got some there, and some.
So you give them to the.
Yeah, Oregon State, University of Alabama has a lot, because I did a big project for them.
I know you did something with landlocked salmon. I never heard of landlocked salmon.
Well, in the Atlantic, there's an Atlantic salmon, which is pretty different from the Pacific salmon, and it's related to the brown trout. But there are some that, over time, I guess from time of glaciation, got trapped in some freshwater lakes, so they can't run to the ocean anymore. But they have become. They survive in the freshwater lakes and spawn and do everything within that, and those are called landlocked salmon.
I see. I thought maybe that you would like to see the final product of what Joe does. This is his latest book. Now, he didn't write the book, but he did all the illustrations.
Well, I did the first edition was.
You wrote the book too?
Yeah, I wrote half, and Mark wrote half, and then Mark revised the entire thing by himself this time.
He didn't ask you.
No, I was too busy, and Mark's a good writer, and I let him do it.
But this is you might like to see what the illustrations in a book like this look like, and I just think it's so interesting. How do you decide? I mean, you obviously cannot illustrate every fish that's mentioned in a book. How do you decide which ones to do?
For our area, it's pretty much the central U.S. anyway, generally most of the Mississippi. It's got anything in it that's a pretty common fish, and then we just went by what I had, and were able to put almost everything that I had from the area in the book.
Well, and the idea, I would think, is like, I like bird books, because I feed the birds and they all come around. So I like to look in there and find a picture of the bird, and because sometimes they'll come and I don't know exactly which bird it is.
Birds are a little more lovable than fish.
I think so too, Joe, but I don't want to say.
You don't hurt my feelings, Mary.
I know that in some of the books that you've done, you have brought forth some kind of esoteric fish, that you don't see very often. And one of them is called, I thought, a Willamette red-side shiner, a pea mouth. I mean, I love these names.
Right, yeah.
How do you find these little guys?
Those are in the Pacific Northwest, and there's a number of species up there, especially in the West and in the Great Basin, that are only limited to, say, one small watershed. And they've differentiated over time, so what was maybe originally the same fish in about 10 different watersheds, sometimes these watersheds become isolated and are what would be termed internal drainages, to where the fish can't get out to spread their genes, and so they become isolated and
like the blind cave fish. Yeah.
And they'll drift and become their own species. And the Pacific, or the Northwest, and the Great Basin has more of those than anywhere else.
So you've got to have a clue as to where to look for these little numbers.
Oh yeah, and say for instance, Oregon has, probably on the order of maybe 10 different basins that are all internal drainages.
And have you been to each of those?
Most of them, and so they'll have their own. Each basin will have their own assemblage of unique fishes, and
well, you could really write a book about each one of them.
Yeah, and that's how, for instance, the trout get differentiated out west, and why there's so many different subspecies
As
of
you
trout.
talk about unique fishes, is there any one fish that comes to mind that just fascinated you when you looked because it was so unique?
Well, there are, I would say, as far as being different and unique, that you can't really beat the saltwater fish. There's a fish called the sea dragon that's related to a seahorse, and that grows all kinds of appendages on it, so it looks like kelp. And that one's amazing to me. But I haven't been able to draw it yet. I haven't had to draw it. But
Well, I think the saltwater fish are amazing because their camouflage is so interesting, and they live at different depths in the ocean, which makes their adaptations unique as well.
and there's so many more saltwater fishes than freshwater.
Oh,
And
yeah. Well, you know, for the Puget Sound thing, there's going to be about 240 illustrations on your part. That's a
Right.
lot of fish, Joe.
Right. I think we've got 66 to go.
66 to go. I was going to ask you how many you got to go. Oh, that's a lot of fish.
Yeah, they take about, most of those would take about a week to do.
Do
each
they?
one, yeah. So maybe a year and a quarter left on it.
Oh, do you ever? You got to have a lot of patience to do this.
Yeah, it takes to be able to sit down and just do the same thing over and over. It does get kind of boring, so it takes a lot of discipline to have to do that. But I got a new Mac, and and that helps because I can listen to the radio or any podcast, anything like that, and that helps pass the time.
But self-discipline is a real issue, and how do you just force yourself to sit there? See, I guess my personality, I just couldn't stand that because I would think of 500 things I just had to do right now besides draw that fish.
Yeah, well, that can be a distraction. There are other things I want to do, but they don't pay the bills.
That's right.
And I don't know how to do anything else. So.
Have you ever thought about doing anything else?
Well, working as a biologist, I guess, or in range, or as a botanist, I could do that. But this gives me more freedom, working for myself.
Oh, that's right.
To, like you say, to get up and go for a walk or go fishing if I want to.
Do you put in regular hours?
Pretty much, yeah. I try to do an 8-hour day, or sometimes I'll work into the evening.
Of all the fishing trips you've taken, does one stand out as the best fun you've ever had?
Oh, I would say the most fun I have chasing fish has been in Mexico, because it's almost like the wild west out in there, and it's you never know what's going to happen, and what's around the next corner, or who you're going to meet, or what you're going to find in a certain stream.
Have you ever had any funny experiences with these fish looking?
Oh, funny stuff that would make me laugh, and well, I've had plenty of good times, and been surprised by what I've caught.
What like? When have you been surprised?
Well, for instance, this summer I spent about 4 or 5 days in Texas working on a project with the University of Texas, and we went out to West Texas where it was bone dry, and the streams were just pretty much dried up. But one of the ranchers told us that there was some water on his land, so we went in to drove in around the stream, and we set up camp there. And here he had the stream was coming through, and everything else was dry for miles, but it was about maybe 4 or 5 foot gouge, or no, I would say maybe about 15 to 20 feet wide and about 12 feet deep for about a quarter mile, just full of water, and it was absolutely full of fish. Out in
Some you
West
hadn't
Texas.
seen before?
Yeah, there's a species in there that we think is going to be described as a new species, a kind of carp sucker that I'd never seen.
When you describe a new species, you don't always see it as a new species when you first look at it, do you?
Right.
So you just pull it out and then take a good look.
Yeah, in fact, I've had several experiences like that where we were thinking we're getting something else and we're photographing, and all of a sudden someone says, you know, this doesn't look quite right. There's something wrong with this fish. It's not what we thought it was.
That's really interesting. And I think probably some of the toxins in the soil have changed maybe the anatomy or of the fish. Some.
I don't see that very often, where I think that could be the deal, but you will see fish in areas where that are polluted. They'll have sores on the body, and then once in a while you'll find a fish like you see on The Simpsons that has an extra fin or where it's not supposed to be.
So what are you working on now? Besides Puget Sound.
I just finished a darter project for Rick Maiden at the University of St. Louis. He has a group of about 9 darters that was at one time considered to be one species, and they've been split out. Now it's 9 different species.
Because of what? Because of their internal gut structure? Because of their appearance?
Well, it would be the appearance, but when the fish are originally described, let's say it was described from southeastern Kansas in the Ozark Stream, and somebody said, well, this is a speckled darter. And then somebody catches one in Missouri or Alabama or Arkansas or wherever, even all the way down into Alabama. The closest thing they would know to compare it to would be speckled darter, so they would call it, at least for the time being, 10 or 20 years, it would be known as also a speckled darter. Then someone would get together with some other scientists and they'd visit all these places where these speckled darters were collected, and they'd collect them alive and photograph them live to look at them and say, you know, something's not right here, because this speckled darter doesn't look anything like the one in Arkansas, and the one in Alabama looks completely different.
You know, you are the envy of many of those fishermen out there, because you get to go and find all these wonderful fish and fish yourself, and they envy you, Joe.
And it's tax deductible.
That's right.
The best part of it.
That's right, that's right. Well, you know, I read someplace that if people concentrated on the really important things in life, there'd be a shortage of fishing poles.
Yeah, I think that too. And now I must not be concentrating on the most important thing. I need to go fishing some more.
Need to go fishing. And you need to go fishing, and it's been so nice having you, Joe. It really has. And I'm glad that 25 years later you're still drawing fish and still able to make yourself sit in that chair and draw darters.
Well, I hope I got another 25 years.
Gosh, I hope so, for both of us. I hope so too. Thank you for being with us. It is our community, and Joe Tomelleri is a marvelous scientific illustrator of fish. And I hope you enjoyed meeting one of your neighbors. I hope you come back soon, and I'll see you. It's our community, you know.